At dawn on February 12, 1945, the harbour at Leyte still trembled with the echoes of the previous night's bombardments. The sky was grey, streaked with the smoke of burning ships, and the shoreline was littered with twisted steel and broken palm trees. Amidst the devastation, a convoy of white-painted vessels appeared on the horizon, their hulls bearing the unmistakable Red Cross. To Japanese lookouts peering through salt-fogged binoculars from the cliffs above, it seemed impossible. Supplies, daily supplies, were being unloaded calmly onto American docks, as though the war had not touched them at all. To the occupying nurses stationed in field hospitals, who struggled with shortages so severe they boiled and reused bandages, the sight bordered on the unreal. Naval Intelligence Bulletin, March 1945. The war in the Pacific was supposed to be a contest of attrition, a grinding struggle where distance itself would strangle the American war machine. Japanese planners had assured their forces that the ocean would starve the enemy long before Japan's will collapsed. Yet on Leyte, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, the opposite unfolded. U.S. soldiers were being fed, clothed, and even provided with blood plasma, cigarettes, and mail, often within hours of request. The Japanese nurses who witnessed these scenes recorded disbelief in private diaries, later recovered by Allied occupation forces. One fragment reads, "They eat as if they are home. They heal faster because their supplies are endless. We ration water, they have milk." Captured Diary, Yokosuka Archive, 1945. The secret was not magic, nor blind luck, but a machinery of logistics so vast that it had no equal in world history. The American Red Cross operated as a civilian arm attached to the military engine, its volunteers working aboard hospital ships, cargo freighters, and even combat-adjacent supply depots. Where Japanese troops were taught to endure with less, half rations, delayed treatment, recycled equipment, the Americans demonstrated an opposite doctrine, that constant resupply was not a luxury, but a weapon. U.S. Army Quartermaster Report, 1944. By 1944, the Red Cross had established over 3,000 overseas units. Hospital ships like the USS Comfort and Hope carried surgeons, anesthetists, and stockpiles of morphine and sulfur drugs, replenished on a near-daily basis by convoys protected by destroyer screens. At Saipan, crates of blood plasma were flown in from Guam by transport aircraft within hours of request. Marines wounded in the morning could be transfused and stabilized before nightfall. Japanese medical staff, operating with dwindling quinine and dwindling gauze, noted the impact bitterly. U.S. Navy Medical Bulletin, July 1945. On Leyte's beaches, eyewitnesses described the surreal contrast. American soldiers, caked in mud and exhaustion, staggered back from the front line to find donuts and hot coffee served from Red Cross mobile kitchens. A Japanese nurse stationed miles inland, tending to men who fought with infected wounds for lack of antiseptics, later wrote in her journal, "Their morale is unbreakable. Supplies fall from the sky. It is as if the enemy is two armies, the fighter and the one that heals him every day." Captured Diary, Osaka Collection, 1946. The logistical backbone behind these daily miracles lay not only in military command, but in the industrial power of American factories and civilian volunteers. The Ford Motor Company retooled assembly lines to produce standardized field ambulances, while General Electric manufactured portable refrigeration units that kept blood plasma viable across the Pacific. Motorola engineers refined radio sets that allowed beachmasters to signal offshore convoys instantly, ensuring that medical crates moved as quickly as bullets. Every engineer's handprint, every technician's calculation was embedded in the daily rhythm of resupply. War Production Board Report, 1944. The Japanese, for their part, had entered the Pacific conflict with a doctrine of decisive battle. Crush the enemy fleet in one blow, and supplies would wither on the vine. But as the war dragged on, Japan's merchant marine shrank under relentless submarine attack, and what remained could not protect fragile hospital and supply chains. Nurses and doctors in the Imperial Army Medical Corps found themselves cutting uniforms into makeshift bandages, boiling scalpels over campfires, and rationing quinine pills at one per patient per day. By 1945, some Japanese hospitals reported mortality rates exceeding 60% for treatable wounds. Imperial Medical Corps Report, March 1945. Meanwhile, the Americans seemed untouchable in their abundance. Reports from Iwo Jima noted that by the third day of the battle, over 500 tons of Red Cross supplies had been delivered, including 80,000 pints of blood plasma and over 40 tons of medical equipment. Japanese nurses, monitoring through intelligence intercepts and the whispers of prisoners, were staggered. One recalled later in interrogation, "We believed the ocean would stop them. Instead, the ocean carried them food every day." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The morale impact was immense. American troops knew that even in the most remote atoll, a Red Cross unit might appear, offering not just treatment but reminders of home, letters, cigarettes, even ice cream. The psychological lift was incalculable. For the Japanese, who measured courage by endurance through suffering, the sight of an enemy who not only fought but thrived seemed to defy reason. Nurses and orderlies, already overworked, began to whisper doubts. If the Americans could deliver plasma daily in a typhoon, what hope remained for Japan's exhausted empire? Interrogation report, Allied Translator and Interpreter Service, Sept. 1945. The secret of daily supplies was more than an accident of geography or a quirk of naval strength. It was a deliberate doctrine forged in steel mills, aircraft plants, and Red Cross offices across the United States. Every volunteer who rolled bandages in Des Moines, every machinist who tightened bolts on a cargo ship in Baltimore, was part of a chain that reached the jungles of the Philippines and the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. That chain never broke. It became the unseen weapon that stunned even the trained medical eyes of Japan's wartime nurses. As February 1945 closed, with Leyte secured, and Iwo on the black sands of Iwo Jima, February 21, 1945, the air thundered with artillery as Marines clawed their way inland against Japanese bunkers carved deep into volcanic stone. Behind them, through smoke and surf, came a rhythm as steady as the tide. LSTs nosed onto the beach, cranes swung out, and crates marked with the Red Cross were offloaded by the ton. The wounded were lifted from stretchers into hospital landing craft, ferried back to ships equipped with entire surgical theaters. To observers on Mount Suribachi, it was beyond comprehension. Supplies did not merely arrive, they arrived with mechanical certainty as if preordained. For the Japanese defenders, trained to expect attrition, the sight was a psychological dagger. U.S. Navy log, Feb. 1945. The hidden advantage lay in the American mastery of logistics, married to civilian humanitarian power. The Red Cross was not a decorative appendage. It was woven directly into the military machine. Every operation was preceded by a blueprint of supply, from ammunition to morphine. Hospital ships like USS Benevolence carried over 500 beds, X-ray units, and refrigeration systems for blood storage. Each day, fresh plasma was flown by C-54 transports from depots in Guam and Saipan, their cargo preserved by portable chillers engineered by General Electric technicians. Bureau of Ships Report, 1944. The Japanese never cracked this code. Their shipping losses, worsened by U.S. submarines, crippled the ability to reinforce even garrisons within sight of their homeland. Red Cross convoys, in contrast, moved under the shield of an industrial navy that churned out Liberty ships and oilers faster than torpedoes could sink them. At peak production, a Liberty ship rolled off American yards every 42 days, each capable of carrying 9,000 tons of supplies, including Red Cross stockpiles of medical kits, anesthetics, and comfort goods. Maritime Commission Statistics, 1943. Technical manuals reveal the detail behind the miracle. Standardized unit medical kits, designated under TM 92294, 1943, contained 60 morphine syrettes, 200 bandages, sulfur powder packets, and sterilization gear. One kit sustained a platoon for 48 hours. On Saipan, over 4,000 such kits were offloaded within 3 days of landings, ensuring frontline corpsmen never ran dry. Japanese records, by contrast, note that entire regiments often fought with only a handful of morphine ampules. Technical Manual TM 9294, 1943. Engineers deserve equal credit. At the Detroit Arsenal, assembly lines once reserved for tanks shifted overnight to produce specialized ambulances with 4-stretcher suspension systems. Each vehicle rolled onto LSTs with instructions printed for rapid deployment. In the Pacific, they functioned as mobile trauma wards, bridging the gap between foxhole and hospital ship. Motorola radios tuned to FM frequencies allowed medics to call for evacuation in real time, a revolutionary step compared to Japanese reliance on runners and field telephones easily cut by artillery. Signal Corps Engineering Review 1944. The decisive test of this system came during the Battle of Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945. In what became the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, over 2,500 Americans were killed and more than 38,000 wounded. Yet even amidst kamikaze attacks and typhoon gales, the Red Cross and Navy Medical Service sustained a daily flow of plasma, penicillin, and morphine. C-47 transport planes carried 3,000 units of blood every 24 hours from Guam to Okinawa, landing on mud-slick runways under fire. Hospital ships like USS Sanctuary recorded performing over 200 major surgeries per day, replenished constantly by Red Cross cargo. U.S. Navy Bureau of Medicine Report 1945, Japanese nurses captured after Okinawa recounted their disbelief. One stated in interrogation, "We believed that no human body could withstand weeks of such battle. But the enemy did not weaken. Each morning, as our men starved and rotted, the Americans were treated as though they were in Tokyo itself." Dramatized composite. For soldiers in tunnels, fighting without quinine or antibiotics, infection became the greatest killer. For Marines on the surface, antibiotics and plasma turned potential fatalities into recoveries. Allied Translator and Interpreter Service, July 1945. Daily supply was more than medical. It was morale. Red Cross clubmobiles, manned by female volunteers, distributed coffee, donuts, and cigarettes to exhausted troops. At Peleliu, one Marine recalled, "I hadn't seen sugar in months. They handed me a donut and I knew we'd win this war." U.S. Marine Oral History, 1947. In contrast, Japanese soldiers on the same island were reported boiling palm sap for sustenance, while nurses fashioned rice gruel into thin porridge stretched across dozens of patients. The difference was not subtle. It was civilization itself projected into battle. Technically, the American supply chain functioned as a living organism. Refrigeration, pioneered by engineers at Frigidaire under military contract, ensured perishable plasma and penicillin survived tropical transit. Portable sterilizers designed by Westinghouse allowed field hospitals to run at near hospital standards. Even the humble Jeep was fitted with stretcher racks, transforming a utility vehicle into a battlefield ambulance. Each invention was the result of deliberate collaboration between factory workers, civilian scientists, and military planners. War Production Board Engineering Memo, 1944. The Japanese could scarcely comprehend such integration. Their strategy had gambled that endurance would triumph over abundance. Yet at Okinawa, while Japanese hospitals ran out of bandages by week 2, American frontline aid stations could swap bloody dressings for sterile replacements several times per day. By May 1945, casualty survival rates for U.S. forces had risen to nearly 90% for wounded, who reached treatment within 1 hour. In Japanese forces, comparable rates often fell below 30%. U.S. Army Medical Statistics, 1945. The secret weapon of daily supplies was therefore not just steel hulls or cargo tonnage, it was the belief that no soldier would be abandoned. That ethos, sustained by engineers, volunteers, and relentless production, broke the Japanese faith in attrition. As one captured nurse bitterly remarked in June 1945, "We fought against not men, but against their endless supplies." Prisoner Interrogation Report, Allied Translator Service, June 1945. And as the American system demonstrated its unstoppable efficiency at Okinawa, a new and chilling question emerged. If the enemy could not be starved, if even in the heart of battle, he lived as if supplied from a homeland untouched, what future could Japan's defenders expect when the next invasion came? The summer of 1945 brought a silence that was almost unbearable. After Okinawa, the Pacific stood on the edge of an invasion of the Japanese homeland. Yet the war would end before that cataclysm arrived. For those who had witnessed the daily miracle of American supply, the psychological impact had already shattered morale long before Hiroshima's flash. To Japanese nurses, doctors, and soldiers, the lesson was unmistakable. Their enemy did not fight alone. Behind every rifleman was a factory, behind every wounded man was a blood transfusion unit, and behind every convoy was the Red Cross, arriving daily as if carried on the tide. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey 1946. Strategically, the American ability to deliver medical supplies and comfort goods shaped entire campaigns. On Saipan, where Japanese defenders expected starvation and disease to cripple U.S. forces, the opposite unfolded. By maintaining high survival rates, the Americans could rotate veterans back into the line, preventing exhaustion from grinding them down. In the Philippines, General MacArthur's staff openly credited the Red Cross supply system for stabilizing frontline morale during the push to Manila. Soldiers advanced knowing that wounds did not mean abandonment. The bond between fighter and supply chain was unbreakable. MacArthur Staff Report 1945. For the Japanese, the psychological contrast was devastating. Diaries from captured nurses reveal a creeping despair. We watch them heal while our men rot. We pray, but their ships bring new miracles every day. Captured Diary, Tokyo University Archive, 1946. The Imperial Army had trained its medical staff to endure scarcity, but scarcity had become a form of defeat. Nurses confessed that morale collapsed not from bombs, but from watching the enemy thrive under conditions that should have been impossible. This was no accident of fate. The United States had mobilized a civilian army of volunteers, engineers, and technicians to sustain the doctrine that no soldier should fight without hope of rescue. The Red Cross, with over 7 million volunteers by 1945, represented the human face of that doctrine. Women in Iowa rolled bandages that ended up on Iwo Jima. Steel workers in Pittsburgh forged the hulls of hospital ships. General Electric engineers built refrigeration systems that carried plasma from Chicago to Okinawa. Every link was part of the chain that nurses in Japan would later call unbreakable. American Red Cross Annual Report, 1945. The strategic consequence was not only survival, but acceleration. Battles that might have dragged into attritional stalemates instead turned into relentless drives. At Okinawa, American casualty survival rates allowed divisions to maintain combat strength longer than Japanese planners considered possible. Japanese staff estimates predicted American divisions would collapse after 3 weeks of heavy losses. Instead, they sustained pressure for nearly 3 months. Japanese War Ministry Planning Papers, 1945. Supplies were not merely comfort, they were momentum incarnate. On the human level, the effect was profound. Wounded Marines who might once have died on muddy beaches now wrote home from Red Cross wards within days. Letters and cigarettes arrived on the same ships as morphine, binding soldiers emotionally to the home front. For every American family, the Red Cross symbol became not just an emblem of mercy, but a promise. Your son will not be left behind. For Japanese families, watching their sons vanish into silence and starvation, the contrast was unbearable. U.S. Army Chaplain Reports 1945. In the months after surrender, Allied interrogators asked Japanese medical staff what had most surprised them. Again and again the answer was the same, the daily arrival of supplies. "We did not believe an army could live like that on foreign soil," one nurse admitted. "We thought the ocean was our weapon." Instead, the ocean was theirs. Allied Translator and Interpreter Service, Nov 1945. The shock was not simply about abundance, it was about predictability. In a war of chaos, the Americans created order. The legacy of that system extended beyond 1945. In Korea, U.S. forces repeated the model, mobile surgical hospitals, MASH, supported by daily supply convoys. In Vietnam, helicopters became the new lifeline, extending the Red Cross ethos into jungle battlefields. By the Gulf War, real-time logistics networks ensured that soldiers in the desert could drink cold water and receive advanced care within the golden hour of trauma. The modern doctrine of network-centric warfare, the idea that information, supply, and connection outweigh sheer firepower, was born in the Pacific of 1945. U.S. Army Medical Doctrine Review, 1991. Engineers and workers were remembered only in fragments, but their contribution was decisive. The Ford assembly line worker, who bolted stretcher racks into jeeps, the Iowa homemaker, who packed Red Cross parcels, the Motorola technician, who tuned an FM radio for medics. All were combatants in their own right. War was no longer won by soldiers alone, but by the invisible millions who sustained them. That truth outlasted the conflict, shaping the Cold War and every war since. War Production Board Final Report 1946. For the Japanese nurses who could not believe what they saw, the disbelief was a recognition of something larger than logistics. It was the recognition that war had changed. Courage and endurance, once the pillars of victory, could not overcome a system that healed men as fast as they were wounded. The Red Cross arriving daily symbolized not just mercy but inevitability. One U.S. Marine, recalling the donut handed to him on Peleliu, later summarized the feeling in words that capture the entire truth. They gave us more than sugar and coffee. They gave us proof we'd make it home. Marine Oral History, 1947. And so the lesson endures. In modern war, connection outweighs firepower and speed defeats attrition. The daily arrival of the Red Cross was more than supply. It was destiny, a quiet weapon as decisive as any bomb. In the end, it was not only the steel of battleships or the roar of aircraft that crushed the Japanese Empire. It was the unstoppable rhythm of crates being unloaded every day, carrying blood, hope, and a promise that America would never let its soldiers stand alone.